Let's see if we are we are going live on YouTube, hopefully in less than 5 seconds.
So yeah, so if you look at the astronomer's weather forecast, you've got cloud cover, right, which is a game changer, a deal breaker if you've got too much cloud. Then you've got transparency. That's how clean the air is. And the air can be loaded up with moisture to make it soupy. And it can also be loaded up with smoke or dust to make it less clean, less transparent. And then third is the seeing. And the sky can be perfectly clear, perfectly dry, but turbulent. And that's what causes the objects to be swimming or twinkling so much. So.
I love the atmosphere. Keeps us safe, but ruins our observing. Okay, now we're live on YouTube. Welcome again. Welcome to, oh my gosh, Chris, we forgot to say, it's our 50th episode of Insider's Guide to the Galaxy. So we made it this far. Yay, mini party. And so welcome on this fine last Insider's Guide of March. It's just Chris and I here today, if you recognize us, and we are focusing on Messiers. Now, I know we do our Messier minutes every week, but this is in celebration of the Messier Marathon. The ideal time to do it is the Saturday. So we thought we'd give you a little bit more Messier, spend a little bit more time, and give you even a longer list to look at this week. So unless Chris has anything else to add, I'll let you take it away.
Well, I'm going to add lots. So yeah, if you look at the Messier list of objects, the list stands at 110, and there's a little bit of controversy whether there should be 110, 109, but that's another story. But they're distributed, throughout the skies of the year. But if you count them up, there are a big load of them in the springtime. So that's why I think there are 40 odd in the spring alone. Out of the 110. And so that's why it's a challenge to get them all discussed under Messier minutes, unless we kind of pile on and do a bunch of extra ones. So that's kind of what today's topic is about. And we're going to double purpose it by talking about the concept of Messier Marathon, the concept of it being galaxy season, and a little bit about how to walk yourself through the Virgo Cluster of Galaxies, and if you're doing your Messier Observing Certificate. So we're going to try to get all that covered today. Just a bit of background, though, on all this Messier, this word Messier. So Charles Messier was an astronomer in France. He was a young guy. He was actually orphaned. His father died at a young age. So he was born in the countryside of France in 1730, and he made his way to Paris. And he had very good penmanship. And so he was actually hired at the Naval Observatory in Paris. And they put him to work as a cartographer at the beginning. But then he got to start using some of the telescopes at the observatory and started doing his own work. And let's say he was 21 years old when he got that job in Paris. And the first documented observation that he made was a transit of Mercury on May 6th of 1753. So that's sort of the beginnings of his career as an astronomer. He was basically using a 4-inch refractor. And the street that the observatory is on, if anybody visits Paris and wants to visit the origins of Messier, it's at the Musée de Cluny, and it's on the Rue de Marcarian in Paris. So I'm not sure the street address, but somebody could look that up. Samantha, I'm going to give you, if you could share with the group the link to the some of those links that I put in the Messier history section of the notes there.
I got it.
Yeah. So he got his start on the Messier objects per se because he was looking for comets. Everybody was abuzz because Edmund Halley, the mathematician, English astronomer, mathematician, had calculated when the comet that he had noted was recorded as visiting during history, past appearances of this comet. He calculated an orbit for it and predicted when it should arrive to sight again. I think it was around 1758, 9 in that range. And so everybody was abuzz, who's going to see it first? And Charles Messier wanted to be among the first to see it. He got scooped, unfortunately, by a German astronomer who actually announced his observation of it on April 1st, which maybe shed some doubt in people's minds as to whether he had actually seen it, because it was all honor system at that point, right? No photographs. It was sketches and notes. But anyway, that got Messier inspired to hunt the skies for comets. And as he did so, he would stumble upon these comet-like objects that looked like comets, but weren't. The trick for comets is that they would change their position every night. And Messier was starting to find things that were stuck in place. And because the star charts of the day weren't very detailed, we have 7, 8, 9,000 deep sky objects in our catalogs now that we plot on our maps and put in our apps. They weren't known then, and nobody had tabulated them then. So he began making note of these things that were confusing him. And at first, he compiled 41 of them, starting with Messier 1. That's the Crab Nebula, which he encountered in August of 1758. And so that was number 1. And he started to tabulate them down. So he finished a list of 41 objects by January of 1765. And he wanted it published by the proceedings of the French Academy at the time. So he submitted it for publication. And just before it kind of went to press, he thought, I'll round it up. I'll make it an odd 45 objects. So he added objects that were already known about. So he didn't discover these, but they were already known about. So think about it. He added Messier 42, 43, which is the Orion Nebula. And then he added Messier 44, which is the beehive in Cancer. And then Messier 45, which is the Pleiades. So they're kind of, you could argue one way or the other that they couldn't be mistaken for comets because they were so familiar to people and so bright and easy to see. But he argued that in certain circumstances that they could be conceivably mixed up with comets. So they added them in. So that was the 45 objects in that list in the first tranche of them. Then he continued to work and he decided to publish a supplement, which he finished in around 1783. So it was a while later. And that one took him up to 68 objects. And before that one went to press, he added 2 more as a kind of a note to the editor. Please add Messier 69 and Messier 70 to that list. And those 2 are two of the globular clusters that are in the teapot in Sagittarius in the summertime sky, 69 and 70, just to put everybody into context. The final list, though, now around that time, around 1779 or so, a great comet appeared in the sky over Europe, and all the comet hunters were very excited. And it happened to pass through Leo Virgo, to the sort of the region that we now know as the Virgo Cluster of Galaxies. And so more and more astronomers were pointing their telescopes at that patch of the sky and discovering all of these fuzzy objects in among the stars in that part of the sky. And one of them was this young chap by the name of Pierre Messier. And Pierre Messier was a bit younger than Charles Messier, but he got keen on hunting at comets too. And he started discovering his own set of these fuzzy non-comets and submitting them into Messier. So Charles Messier was collecting additional objects from these other collaborators. So let's see, in 1784, he completed the list at 100. And then Messier gave him 3 more. So M101, M102, M103, that Charles Messier didn't have time to observe himself before he handed the paper in. And it turned out that 101 and 102 may have been the same object. And so there was a bit of a fuss there. And Messier later wrote a letter that was talking about that. Nowadays, we've taken M102 and assigned it to a truly new object, a truly different object. So they're independent, but it is, some scholars think that they were the same objects. So that brought it up to 103. And then years later, it was more modern astronomers that brought it up to the current 110 objects. So Canada's Helen Sawyer-Hogg, perhaps before she was working in Canada, because she started in the US, She went through the notes of Messier and Messier and noted that there were 6 more objects that could have been added to the list. And she could only confirm 4 of them. And one of them was already known, that was M104. And then she added M105, 106, and 107. And then in 1960, American astronomer Owen Gingerich, he confirmed 2 of the ones that Helen Sawyer Hogg hadn't been able to find. So those became 108 and 109. And then something interesting happened. A Welsh astronomer named Kenneth Glyn Jones was looking at Messier's sketches, and he noted that Messier had remarked on 2 little dwarf galaxies beside the Andromeda Galaxy. You know, when we look at the Andromeda Galaxy, it's got M31 and then M32 and M110, because the M110 had been accredited to Carolyn Herschel. But when Glyn Jones saw the sketch that Messier had made, he realized that Messier actually had discovered it. And so everybody agreed that it should become 110. That's how the list was born. 110 objects in the Messier list. So what's cool is that you can see the scans of the pages of the published work. And that's the, Samantha can put the link into the chat for that, which is a nice thing to look at. You can see the actual thing. So what's going on? Let me just share my Stellarium and we'll get started on why we're...
We have a quick question before we go, just to move on to that. Do you know why, like somebody asked, are comets hard to find? And why would someone mistake a comet for these Messier objects if you didn't have this list? Or like, how would you find comets versus and differentiate it from the Messier list?
So what the, I mean, we can go into this on more detail on another day, but essentially the people hunting for comets were taking their telescopes and doing sweeps of the sky. So they'd sweep left and right, and they do a sweep typically post-sunset and pre-dawn, because the comets were getting brighter when they were getting nearer to the sun. So they were kind of, not necessarily the ecliptic is not what we're talking about, but we're just basically talking about the elongation away from the sun, east or west, so morning or evening. So they would look for these fuzzy patches, and that would mean that they're looking low in the sky, so through more atmosphere, so the objects aren't maybe as clear, and also maybe fighting a bit of twilight. So, you know, a deep sky object when seen in twilight, I read an essay that talked about why Messier may or may not have put the double cluster in his list, which is an obvious star cluster that anybody with binoculars can see, or almost it's pretty much naked eye. And it was known from antiquity by, you know, people with sharp eyesight, but there were times of the year where it would be hugging the horizon and could look fuzzy. And so, you know, the argument could be made that maybe it should have been on his list, but I think because it was so famous, he hadn't bothered, or maybe there are other reasons, we don't know. So yeah, so that does that answer the question? I think so.
I think so, yeah. So I guess you can move on.
All right, let me share my screen and bring up Stellarium here and pull the little heads out of the way. All right. All right. So I'm going to show you the distribution of the Messier objects in the sky using Stellarium here. And this line across here, this is the ecliptic. So that's the path of the sun and the planets. And let's bring up the Messier objects here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off the daylight. And I'm going to hide the sky. And actually, I've got more than the Messier showing. So let me just turn off the NGCs and IC objects. So so only the ones with the symbols and the blue labels are the Messier objects. You can see that a lot of them are near the Milky Way because they're star clusters and open clusters and things like that, planetary nebulas. And then there are a patch that are away from the plane of the Milky Way, and those tend to be the galaxies. Now, if I bring up a graph of the, let me see, the equatorial grid here. So this is the equatorial grid. So here's Polaris at the North Celestial Pole, and here's the South Celestial Pole in octans. And you can see that they're really distributed all over the sky. But remember, he was only noting objects that he could see from Paris. So in fact, the most southerly Messier object is Messier 7, which is in, let's see, it's in Scorpius. So where's my Scorpius here? Here we go. So there's the summertime sky. So there's M7 in Scorpius. So that's the most southerly one. And the most northerly one is M82, which is the M81, M82 galaxies up in Ursa Major. And technically, you can only see all the Messiers between 20 degrees south latitude and 55 degrees north latitude. But truly, that's a bit of a cheat because at, let's see, M7 only barely clears the horizon in late June at 55 north, and M82 barely clears the horizon from 20 degrees south in late February, like basically just peaks above the horizon when it's to the south. So really, you would need to be well within that minus 20 to plus 55 range to see them all. Bear in mind that Paris is at 48 degrees north, which is actually no farther north than many of the cities in Canada that we're talking about here. Okay, so let's see.
I know our telescope in California, there's one that we can just never catch because it's out of our view, but there's one we'll have no chance of ever getting because of our latitude there.
Yeah. So, all right. So let's go to tonight. So now the question is, what's this deal about Messier marathons? So the idea of the Messier marathon is that there's a time of year when you could theoretically observe all 110 Messier objects within a single night, or within 24 hours if you want to cheat a little bit. And that happens because of the following. So I'm going to bring the time to solar noon here. And I'm going to actually zoom in a little bit here. So this is solar noon. And you might notice that we've got a few Messiers over here and a bunch of Messiers over here. And there really isn't anything in here. So from the Western Cetus up through Western Pisces and up through Pegasus, he didn't log any object. There are lots of deep sky objects there, of course, but not on the Messier list. And so when the sun is parked in this patch of the sky, which happens on the same dates every year, then it's not near any of the other Messiers. So all of those Messiers would be theoretically visible in a twilight or a nighttime sky. And as you mentioned, we're coming up on the new moon. So here's the moon, if everybody can see the moon here. So the moon is going to pass new moon on March 31st to April 1st. And so that'll give you a dark moonless sky in which to use to see all the Messier objects. Now, you might notice that this year at new moon, the sun is kind of getting close to M40, M74 and M77. These are the two that you're going to watch first in evening at sunset. And it's relatively far from M30, M2 here in the pre-dawn sky. So it's going to be difficult maybe. So what we'll do is let's center on M74 and let's set the sun tonight. Let's go back to today and set the sun and bring up the sky. So what you're going to do when you do a Messier marathon is that you're going to wait. If you're going to use go-to, then you've got to have your telescope already aligned because you need to be able to dial in the first object as soon as it's dark enough to see it. So as you can see here, it's getting darker and boom, there we go. So this evening from the Toronto latitude at 8:30 p.m., the sky will be getting maybe barely dark enough to catch M77 and M74, which are the first two that you need to pick up in the marathon. Those are the critical ones that you need to grab. And they're both galaxies, so they're magnitude 9.39 and 8.87. So they're not dim galaxies. They're pretty good that way. But bearing in mind that you're looking at them through lots of atmosphere. So the amount of air we're looking through is almost 8 air masses, or 8 times the thickness of air that we normally want to look at. So those you can catch. And then from the rest of the time on, then you're going to grab the other objects, or maybe march your way across the sky from the western sky, following around to the eastern sky. You don't have to worry too much about the M31, M32, M110, M33. These are kind of northerly, so there's actually lots of opportunity to see them, either catch them now in evening, or they're actually rising pretty early in the morning too. So let's just sort of scroll around here. So you're going to follow through Orion, Cancer, Gemini, Leo. And at some point in the middle of the night, you're going to run into the Virgo cluster of galaxies. This clump of them is about 16 or 17 Messier objects, all concentrated in this patch of sky. Then there's actually kind of a break, kind of you can relax a while the Earth rotates and brings more of them into view. And then you'll end up with another flurry of things to look at in the summertime constellations in the wee hours of the morning. And then it gets tricky here. So as we get closer to dawn, the last object that you typically nab is Messier 30, this globular cluster Messier 30. You can see its magnitude 7.7. But look at the angle of the ecliptic. What that means is that the sun is not much far behind M30 in terms of the vertical height. So M30 is rising very, very short time before the sun rises. And that means the sky is getting bright when you're trying to get it. So actually, a lot of times, into a lot of cities or a lot of locations, people sort of do a Messier marathon, but it's everything but M30 because it tends to be really, really tricky. This is one, though, where if you live further south, you'd have the advantage. So if you plan to do a Messier marathon and you want to guarantee to get them all, go down into the US, because if I go south, look at the ecliptic does, tilts up, it makes it dead easy. In fact, if you were to go, so this is around Miami, sort of the Florida, the latitude of Miami, there you've got M30, should be no difficulty at all to see it. And if we head back kind of earlier in the evening, let's check the previous evening sky and look at those M74, M77. M74 and M77 are kind of maybe just as difficult as they were from here in Toronto, but they're definitely easier if you're down in Florida. All right, so that's kind of the basis for what this is all about. And just by the way, let me get back to the noon time again, because I want to just show you something really interesting. You can do this with yourself. You can do your sort of planning for your own Messier marathon. So I'm going to hide the daylight again. So again, here we are with the new moon in March 31st of 2022. Look what happens next year. So I go to 2023, and then I need the date where the moon is new. So I'll wind back a few days. There's the new moon. So on March 21st, 2023, the new moon will be occurring when it's much better balanced between the two, between the gap, much more centered in the gap where the Messiers are. So next year will be a really prime one for people to plan to do it if they didn't do it this year. All right. So let's go back to any questions so far?
No question. I don't think we have one. I'm going to clarify. Now, if you're going to do this, this is an all-nighter, but there's some times for naps, and we'll go through it more detailed. Like it's kind of a rush at the beginning, and then throughout the rest of the night, you get kind of more spaced out. But that's where the planning comes in for your location. And I know this because I've been planning for our own robotic telescope one. I don't think, can Messiers not be in a galaxy? God, if you could just put in the chat what you mean by that, and hopefully we can answer it for you. But I'll let you keep going, Chris, and then
so what I'll do is I'll put a plug in for, so a year ago, we did an Insider's Guide to the Galaxy on the subject of spring galaxies and the Messiers. And on that one, I actually went through the definition of a DSO, a deep sky object, and I talked about each type of deep sky object, each class of object, where they are in the galaxy and distributed in the sky. So I recommend if you go onto YouTube and look that one up, that might be the answer to your question. But yeah, all the Messier objects can be part of our galaxy or they can be other galaxies. So anything goes.
I'll share a link in the chat to that Messier episode because this is kind of an addendum, in addition to that one. We're not going to go over the same stuff. So if you want to learn even more, check out that Insider's Guide episode.
Yeah, I thought I'd do something a little different this year. Some of the same, but some different. Okay, so here's tonight's sky. Now, if you want to plan your own Messier marathon, there's a tool that the Calgary RASC Center hosts online that lets you type in your city, your location, and it'll give you the recommended viewing order for the Messiers. Again, once you grab those first couple necessary ones in the evening, you've got some flexibility, but it will vary a little bit by your latitude and things like that. So you can check that tool out.
I can attest. It's very good. I used it. I've been using it to plan my own Messier marathon. Well, the big one. So it works and it's good. Also, it's RASC, you know. And
last year when I wrote a story for Sky News on Galaxies, Alandria posted an online only supplement to that article on running the Messier marathon. So that's got a lot of tips and tricks and some of these links as mentioned as well. So let's just run through a few of the kind of best practices for planning and executing your Messier marathon. So you need clear skies. You can tolerate, you're not imaging them. You're just needing to get a glimpse of them basically. So you don't need perfect seeing conditions, but you do need clear skies and they need to be clear consistently for the whole night. You need good sight lines to the horizon, down to the horizon for those difficult ones. So in the pre-dawn in the east and in the post-sunset in the west. An elevated location helps too. If you can mount yourself on a hill or if you've got rooftop access to your apartment building or something like that, with safety in mind, then that gives you an advantage as well. Now if you'd be urban in that case, so it might be tougher to see some of the dim ones. We're not handing out certificates for Messier marathons, so go-tos allowed. If you really want to be old school and force yourself to do it manually, I guess you could. It'd be very tough, but most people use a go-to telescope. You need to have it aligned though. You need to be able to either find M77 and M74 in twilight without aligning it, or you need to have your scope lined up ahead of time. And there are different strategies around that. You could align on maybe a bright planet if you were lucky to see a bright planet and kind of leave it running. You could line it up in the morning and leave your telescope tracking all day or have it sleep, that kind of thing. But you need to have it lined up. One of the tricks that some people recommend is actually to set the alarm and get up in the middle of the night and do the second half of the marathon, because you can align your telescope in the dark. Go to sleep all day, leave your telescope aligned to the sky, and then when sunset hits, finish your marathon into the evening. And you've still done it in the same day, but you've just flipped it end for end. So you can start the marathon in that case around 3:00 in the morning.
Now, if you want even more of a challenge, you can read about, I can't see. This edition of Sky News talks about someone doing the Messier marathon while running a marathon.
Oh yeah.
So if you want a challenge, Warren Finley, and it's called the bi-marathon. So he lines up his telescope, does all the viewing, and then splits up the distance to run a marathon in the middle. If you want something else to do at night, that impresses me because you have to be pretty quick on your toes to find things and then keep running. That's another fun article about the Messier marathon in this Sky News.
So the rough approach is grab M77 and M74. Don't dawdle though. Don't take too much time on them, and then grab your your handy M33, M31, M32, M110. By that time, it gets a little darker. Then you're going to work your way across the sky. Okay. And then you should arrive at the Virgo cluster around midnight or so. So that's around the time you'll be running into them. They'll take you a little time to get through, as we'll see in a little bit here. And then the next wave should start coming into view nice and high enough to look at around 3 o'clock in the morning. And you're going to get the next batch. And then, as I said, the last batch are going to be M55, 75, 72, 73, and M30, our friend M30, if possible. All right. Okay, so that's kind of the approach. Those are the tips that I'd offer. I don't know if anybody else has any tips they'd like to share, or Samantha, if you want to talk a little bit more about what you're planning to do and how people can join you.
Sure. I was going to say, anybody who has tips or has even attempted it and what they ran into issues, let us know in the chat. I've never attempted it up until this point, but I have easy. So this year, there was actually 2 major dates to do it, but April 2nd is the best day. And so RASC is, fingers crossed, the roof on our observatory opens, but we are programming our robotic telescope to do as many Messier objects the night of April 2nd as we can. I say as many Messier objects because we have trees blocking our views by the time, as Chris pointed out, some stuff that sets or is really close to the horizon, by the time the sun starts to go down, we can't see those because they'll move out of our view. But I think out of the 110, we can get 104. And what we're going to do is we're going to be live streaming it on YouTube. And then we're going to put some nice music on in the background. And basically, you'll get to watch the telescope slew to the targets. By slew, I mean our version of Solarium. It's called SkyX. If my astronomers out there use that. That directs our telescope. You'll watch it move to the target and then take a picture. And it'll be, we've also worked it out so that the pictures are actually pre-calibrated before you see them. So you won't get all the weird dust bunnies and everything. And then we hope by the end, we'll have a kind of chart at the end of the night of 104 Messier objects that we were able to capture. Now, this was done previously by the previous owner of our telescope, but this is the first time we have really tried to attempt it. If the roof opens, I say, because last time it didn't open for 3 days straight when I tried this, to show everybody. And if you're not ready to go outside and do it yourself, you can flick on YouTube and watch our telescope do the Messier marathon and have some relaxing music in the background.
Cool. That sounds good. I don't know if I'll be sleeping or up, or we'll see. I'll see where we're at.
It's okay. I'll be saved on YouTube after.
I should have mentioned too that the idea behind running a Messier marathon was actually invented independently by several astronomers, American astronomers, Tom Hoffelder, Don Mackholtz, and Tom Ryland around 1976 got the idea. Don Mackholtz is kind of considered to be kind of famous for Messier marathons. And he says, or I don't know if he still is, but he at one point, he was putting people's names up on his website that had successfully completed the Messier marathon. I put his link to his website in the chat for you here. All right. Okay, let's talk a little bit about galaxies and galaxy season. So it turns out that Messier marathon also coincides with galaxy season for Canadian astronomers or for North American astronomers. And that's because of what the Milky Way is all about. So I'm just going to get rid of the ecliptic line here. And I'm going to turn off the Messiers for a second here. And I'll turn off the sky as well, so you can see the Milky Way. All right. So you can see the sky tonight around 9:30 p.m. Here's the Milky Way running sort of across the western half of the sky here. And if I advance the date forward, you can see how the Milky Way is dropping towards the western horizon. And when I get to somewhere here in May. I'm just going to go later too. So let me just go to sort of 11 p.m. or midnight time of range. So here we go. Yeah. There's 11 p.m. So you can see the Milky Way is running all the way around kind of the edge of the horizon. And even if I go back a little bit, go forward a little bit more, you can actually find mid-May where you've got pieces of the Milky Way almost all the way around the sky. That's just to do with the geometry of how the plane of our solar system is offset in angle from the plane of the galaxy. So due to the Earth's position at this time of the year, it causes the plane of the Milky Way to vacate the sky overhead. And so what you're doing now is the sky overhead near the zenith here is actually looking away from most of the material in our galaxy. Obviously, the other stars in the sky above us are neighbors of ours inside the Milky Way, but the percentage of sort of junk from our galaxy, dust and gas and so on, is at a minimum at right angles to the galaxy. So if the plane of the galaxy is on the horizon, that means the pole of the galaxy is right overhead. And if you're interested, the North Galactic Pole is in Coma Berenices. And if you look at Coma Berenices, this constellation, which is a set square sort of shape, here's the set square. And then across the top of the set square, there's a pair of stars halfway along. And those two stars, somewhere around here, let's see if I have the galactic grid. Oh, you can bring up a marking on here to show you the North Galactic Pole. Markings, galactic grid. And there's the North Galactic Pole, right near those two stars in Coma. So that's in theory the sparsest patch of the sky in terms of what our galaxy obscures. So let me just get rid of this. And it turns out that near here, there's also something called the Virgo Cluster of Galaxies. And the Virgo Cluster of Galaxies is, let me get my fun facts here about that. It's around 1,300 to 2,000 galaxies, all kind of clumped together. And we think that perhaps those galaxies are arranged in a kind of a filament that's actually pointing away from us, arranged in a direction away from us. So it's almost like a tube, and the galaxies are kind of distributed in and along that tube. In fact, if I don't restrict my deep sky objects only to the Messier objects, now you can see just how many galaxies are here. And I'm just going to get rid of the labels so you can see just the symbols. Bring up my stars again. So this is the so-called Virgo cluster. It actually sits kind of on the border between Virgo and Coma Berenices. And the easiest way to find it is to use the star Vindemayatrix, or Epsilon Virginis, and the Nebula, which is the tail of Leo the Lion. And just point your finder scope exactly halfway between, and that's your kind of entry into them. The galaxies in the Virgo cluster consist of both kind of aged elliptical galaxies that have sort of swallowed up their neighbors and have grown into these massive galaxies with supermassive black holes, as well as spiral galaxies, the typical type of spiral galaxies that we're used to seeing. They're grouped into sort of subclumps. There's a big clump called Virgo A, which is centered around Messier 87. And then there's another one around Messier 86 and another one around Messier 89, and then some more minor clumps. And what's interesting is that these galaxies have been interfering with one another gravitationally or contacting each other gravitationally. So they're being stripped of gas in some cases. So you'll find that a spiral galaxy where you expect to see lots of star formation has very limited, because its source gas has been kind of sucked out of it by a passage of another member of the cluster. Stars get ejected, so apparently there are a lot of intergalactic stars or rogue stars that are in the mix of this cluster. There are bridges of gas and stars between galaxies as they pass. They sort of pull material out of one another, and then you can have a lot of high velocities or peculiar velocities. So you can find, the main cluster may be receding from us, but you'll find individual galaxies that are actually racing towards us at fairly high speeds. I'll mention some of those as we go along. So let's dive into the our access point, our main access point. I'm just going to turn off and let me bring up some of these labels. Here we go. So as I said, if you bring your finder scope exactly midway between these two bright, they're naked eye stars, and aim your telescope there and zoom in, you're going to find yourself roughly in this patch of the sky. And if you're using a relatively low magnification eyepiece, then you're almost guaranteed to find a bright galaxy in the scene. And you've got three big bright galaxies to choose from here: M86 and M84 on the right here, and M87 on the left. M87 is the one that the Event Horizon Telescope group imaged the black hole in this galaxy 2 or 3 years ago. You saw that. Remember that orange donut that was in the news? That's from the black hole in the center of Messier 87. But what you want to look for first is you're going to probably find these two. Try to find these two, M86, M84. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to actually show you a telescope view. So this is a simulated telescope view using a 6-inch Dobsonian reflector telescope and a 26 millimeter Plössl lens. So it's kind of stock equipment that you might buy. And it's not a giant telescope, but just a standard 6-inch Dob with a 26 millimeter Plössl. And that'll give you a field of view of about 1.5 degrees. And as you can see here, you can easily fit in M84 and M86, and then some other galaxies in the scene as well. And this is Marcarian's chain. This is the beginning of what's called Marcarian's chain. And you can see it here as this array of galaxies that swoop up, starting at M84 and heading on up. So Marcarian's chain the name comes from a gentleman by the name of Benjamin Marcarian, who in the early 1960s was looking at the motion or the velocities of the galaxies in the Virgo cluster. And he noted that this group were all kind of moving in concert with one another. And not only that, but they were also arranged in this interesting kind of asterism of galaxies. I don't know, what would you call it? What's a asterism? Comes from aster for star. So I don't know what an asterism of galaxies would be called, but somebody should come up with a name for that.
Yeah, someone needs to use whatever the base of galaxy is.
Yeah. So before if you're not on the clock and you just want to enjoy galaxy season, take the time to really appreciate, Marcarian's chain and get familiar with it, because it's really a handy landmark or anchor point for your Messier exploration in the Virgo cluster. And it's so obvious when you found it that you'll come back to it and you'll recognize it again and again. So I'll just run you through a couple of the elements here. So we've got M84 and M86. These are big elliptical galaxies. So they're sort of amorphous blobs, and that's what happens generally when galaxies merge. They lose their structure and they end up with these sort of amorphous shapes. Next up in the list, though, and these are kind of like links in a chain if you want to measure these off. So these steps are about 17 arc minutes, so about half the moon's diameter. And then another step of about 20 arc minutes. This brings you to a pair of galaxies. This is the NGC 4402 and 4388. Okay. And then there's another pair a little bit higher up here. Sometimes these are called the eyes. And then at the end of the row, we get, let's see, 4425. Let me just bring up the names here so we have all the names. There we go. And what I can do is take off the designations and use the nicknames. So here are the eyes. The inner eyes are the ones that are interacting. So you can see how the galaxies are distorted a little bit because they're gravitationally interacting with one another. So you got those two. So M84, M86, the eyes, that pair, and then you've got another pair here. And then you've got, keep going, you've got NGC 4473, NGC 4477, on all the way up to 4459. And then we can get into the Messiers from there. So those are really fun to look at. All right. So let's go through the Messier objects. Now, so Samantha, remind me, what I did is I skipped through Leo. Do you want to do Leo now, or do you want to continue into Virgo? Let's see,
Virgo makes most sense because we are right in the point of the sky that we have quite a bit of our Messier minute objects today.
Yeah.
So let's start with that, even though all this will be uploaded, excuse me, on our website right after the episode. There was a lot, so I was a little behind on getting them done, but they're split up between what's in Leo and what's in the Virgo cluster Virgo area / the other constellation nearby. Can you remind me which one that is, Chris? That also kind of includes some of these galaxies, the COM.
Yeah, we'll talk about that here.
But all the finder charts are organized based on that. But it'll all be up. So if this seems a lot, because there's a lot of objects, don't worry. We always have a reference at ras.ca/Messier-minutes, or wherever you find Insider's Guide. We'll have a link for that as well.
Right. So there are basically about 16 or 17 Messier objects in this area, in the Virgo cluster area. And it can be a challenge for people who are beginning to tackle these objects and to log them and to get their Messier certificate. But as I said, if you use landmarks like the Marcarian's chain and those bright galaxies in it, it can act as kind of your anchor point from which you sortie out away from it and follow along. I'll share this picture that I made using Solarium of a way that I tackled the Messier objects in the Virgo cluster. And we'll go through this step by step in a minute here. So there's your Marcarian's chain in the middle, M84 and M86, and swooping up this way. And then from here, you can actually migrate and hop from galaxy to galaxy. So if you follow along the notes, you'll pick up on that. Okay. So here we go. So if you start at M86, let me just highlight M86 here. So M86 is, as I said, it's an elliptical galaxy. It's a great home base to start with. It's bright and large. It's relatively easy for smaller telescopes, especially if you're living in an urban, in a rural setting where your skies are darker. People have actually seen it in binoculars as well from a dark sky location. When you're looking at it, you want to note its shape. And then, of course, you're going to pick up or remark on some of the galaxies that you might be able to see around it as well. M84. Oh, by the way, it's about 50 million light years away, and it's one of those ones that is heading towards us at a high rate of speed. So M84 is a bit smaller. It's either an elliptical or it might be a lenticular type galaxy. I'll share the galaxy classification diagram here so you get a sense of what we're talking about. So galaxies, this is a famous tuning fork diagram of galaxy types. It starts out with these sort of round, elliptical, featureless galaxies at one end. They get progressively more elongated, and then they become lenticular, and then they split into various spiral galaxies. So you can have spiral galaxies with round middles, so the centers are just basically points. And you can have galaxies that have elongated or bar-shaped cores. So you can see how they have a little stick or length inside them. And then you have something that's intermediate in between those two. And then the farther you get to the end of this fork, the less clearly defined the arms are. So you can get fewer arms or more ragged arms or partial arms. And then you get into irregular galaxies that have maybe been ripped apart or disturbed in some point in the past. So that's kind of your basic diagram. I've actually got a link to it in the notes that for the Wikipedia page where you can pick up that diagram. It helps to explain what we're talking about. So yeah, so M84 might be lenticular, might be elliptical. It can be even a little bit brighter than the other, than M86, even though it's smaller, but it's a bit more compact, a bit more dense. So what can be seen in binoculars and smaller telescopes, it's about 60 million light years away. Okay, from here, we're going to go to M87. So if you remembered, M87 was down here. I'm going to switch back to the names, to the numbers for these designations. And if you put up a telrad, so let me just put my telrad ring on here. So a telrad ring is a handy way of working. You can see that the center diameter of the telrad is equal to the moon's diameter, 30 arc minutes. And then the inner ring is 2 degrees, and then the big ring is 4 degrees. So you can see that this distance between these two is about 1.5 degrees. So that's M87. M87 in a telescope, again, will be kind of the bright, round, elliptical shape, really relatively easy in binoculars, any size of a telescope. This one's got, most of these big elliptical galaxies have giant supermassive black holes in them. Some of them are radio sources. This is the one that had the event horizon imaged. It's about 55 million light years away, and it's possibly about 200 times larger than our Milky Way galaxy. And in a zoomed in view, you can start looking at some of the other galaxies that are around it. So I jumped from these two out to M87, and then I can keep going from here up to M89. So M89. So M89 is a good point to anchor on. You'll come back to this in a little bit, but it's about 1.2 degrees to the east of Messier 87. It's probably an elliptical galaxy. It could be, could look round because its long axis is actually pointed towards us. Again, it's relatively easy in medium and larger telescopes. It's about 50 million light years away. Another big black hole in the center of that one. Now, from here, you can decide whether you want to go to M90 or whether you want to drop down to M58. Me, I went down to M58. So let me go to M58 here. I'll show you in the telescope eyepiece view. And again, don't forget that, we started out at M89 in that 6-inch Dob with the 26 millimeter Plossl. You can see them both at the same time. So they're actually, fit within the same field of view. So M58, it's a barred spiral galaxy. So this one's got the pretty spiral structure in it. You'll need a bigger telescope in very dark skies to see all the details in it. It's about 62 million light years away. And when you're in the neighborhood, take a look at this little pair that's in the same area. See if you can spot them. They're called the Siamese twins. So that's something to keep an eye out for. All right, from M58, and again, I'll just go into my eyepiece view. We're going to head east and pick up M59 in the same field of view. So M59 is a bit smaller. You can see compared to these others, it's quite a bit smaller. It's an elliptical galaxy. It's an E5, so it's a little bit elongated. And again, you need a medium and larger telescope to pick this one up. It's about 60 million light years away. And what's nice is that there's some stars nearby, and you want to use the stars to help you focus on the galaxy. All right, from here, obvious step is to go to M60. So M60 is an intermediate intermediate shape elliptical galaxy. It's kind of at the very eastern edge. So the Virgo cluster kind of ends around here. We're at the outer rim of it. Most telescopes will show you this shape. I'll just zoom in with a bit of a stronger eyepiece here. Let's go to my 14 mil Plossl. And you can look for its little companion. So it's got a little spiral galaxy companion sitting right nearby, NGC 4647. That you'll need a bit of a larger telescope to pick that up. And then you've got, again, there are all kinds of galaxies around that aren't Messiers, but I've just labeled only the Messier ones in this view. All right, back to my other standard Plossl eyepiece here. So that's the end of this path. So we can retrace our steps back to 59, 58, okay, and go down to 89. And 89 will then take us to 90. So M90. So M90 is a large, bright spiral galaxy. I'll just zoom in on here so you can see a little better. So it's fairly high surface brightness because it's tilted a little bit closer to edge on from our point of view, so that brightens it up. It should be visible in binoculars, although small, and any size of a telescope will do. And then if you've got a bigger aperture, you can start looking for some structure in the spiral arms. You can look for the little offshoot galaxy nearby. You've got some stars to help you focus. And, try to see if you see the detail in any aspects of its shape, of its orientation, that kind of thing. People have remarked that the arms look sort of smooth and featureless. And again, that's due to that idea that the dust, the star-forming fuel, if you like, or raw material has been stripped out or sucked out of the galaxy by something else. All right, so from here, we're going to go back to, okay, so we're here at 90. So now we're going to go to 91. So 90 is here. Let me just grab here. So 91 is to the north. So we need to go in our DAW, we're going to go down. We're going to follow our field of view down. You can see that you can just barely fit 90 and 91 in the same field of view at this at 1.5 degree field of view. So M91, pull that one up into view. So this is another barred spiral galaxy. Were you saying something? This is a pretty one. It's got a barred center, so it's a barred spiral. It's because it's face on, it's a little bit fainter. So you'll need it's a challenge for smaller telescopes. But try and see if you can find the arms, see if you can recognize the shape of the arms and the elongation of the bar and that kind of thing. All right. So that's our one path. Let me just bring up this picture here again. So what we just did is we explored down here, across here, and up to 88. All right. What's next? All right. Do we want to go to 100? So to get to 100, we've got to go a farther jump towards this way. So to get to 100, we're going to go to the, oops, let's find that again here.
This is good practicing your star hopping skills.
Yeah.
If you want to try. Like his galaxy hopping skills.
There's 88. You want to follow the stars to the northwest.
We also have a suggestion, Galaxism from Stephen.
Galaxism.
Which we should call
Galism.
a
Galism. That sounds good to me. A Galism.
Okay, keep going. Sorry.
So M100. So M100 is another really pretty one. Sorry, it's so the trick I said is that if you went back to M88, this is the trick I had in my notes, is to go to M88. Okay, see this bright star here, the HIP. No, which one? This one. Yeah. Anyway, head basically towards the bright field star and keep going, and that'll take you there eventually. a couple of field of view jumps in that direction. Okay, so this is called a grand design galaxy, basically your classic face-on spiral galaxy. It's about 55 million light years away. It's got prominent arms. So let me just zoom in a little closer here. Gorgeous prominent arms. The core is not especially concentrated or bright, so it's probably going to be in a smaller telescope, kind of a round fuzzy patch. But if you've got dark skies and a bigger scope, see if you can tease out any details. And you've got some little elliptical companions to the east and to the north of it as well. All right, next up we want M99. M99 is, let me go back to my eyepiece view. So the trick there is can you see this little array of stars on the edge of the field here? This little sort of curved arc of stars. If you put them at the northeastern edge of your field of view and go opposite them through the galaxy and head up this direction, then you're going to pick up M99. That's the trick for doing it. So M99 is a moderately sized unbarred spiral galaxy. Let me just zoom in on it a little more. It's face on, which usually makes it dimmer, but because it's sort of concentrated and small in a small patch of sky, it has a bit of a higher surface brightness. So it should be reasonably good for smaller telescopes. It's got a one kind of crooked arm or a loose arm that's hanging out. So you can see if you can spot that when you're making your notes. It's about 50 million light years away and receding away from us quickly. So it's neat. And again, it has a nice little pair nearby. So let me just put the eyepiece view up again. Can you see this little pair of galaxies here on the edge? You can bring them more into the center. So you've got an edge-on spiral galaxy here. So this is NGC 4302 and 4298 that you can add as bonus objects that aren't Messiers. All right, now you can see M98's over here at the edge of the view. So if we kind of slew towards the star 6 Commi, then we can pick up M98. So M98 is, let's see, highly tilted spiral, so it's closer to edge on. And here we go, as you can see it. It's a bit smallish, so it's not as easy in smaller telescopes, but it's, you should be able to pick up a little elongated streak in your telescope, and averted vision will help with that one. And it's about 44 million light years away. So now we want to retrace our steps back to M100, and then 99, and then we want to end up at 100, 99. So from M100, and let me just bring up my master chart here. So we've just gone up here, along here, and we went to 100, then we went down to 99, 98. And now we've got another one, M85, to pick up at the top of the list here, which is easiest to get to from M100. So here's M85 sitting above. So while you're here at M100, there's that crooked row of stars I talked about a minute ago, and you want to slew up and beyond them. Yeah, and that gets you to your 99, but we want to go to 85. Where's our 85? It's the other way. Go back the other way. Oops, where are we at here? Yep, there's that row of stars. We want to go through one end of it, basic is what we're doing. Oops, go back here and end up at 85. M85 is a, let's see, medium bright lenticular galaxy, 60 million light years away. It's small, so it's going to be tough in binoculars and small telescopes, but it will get bigger and bolder with bigger aperture. You want to look for field stars around it, and you want to look for this little barred spiral galaxy for NGC 4394, just a few minutes to its east. So that's actually it for the Messier cluster galaxies for this round.
I think there should be just a Virgo cluster marathon where I challenge, if people are ready to go out with the North Clear Sky, challenge you before the next Insider's Guide to try to do just the Virgo cluster ones. See if you can do them all in one night. I also want to say one of the funny things on Chris's notes is you're calling M88. It's relatively close, only 47 million light years away. And then isn't distances in the space crazy that is close to us?
Yeah. So the Virgo cluster, kind of the core of it's about, on average, about 53 million light years away. So we've got some on the near side and some on the far side.
We just have a quick question about that. Some light year distance you reference are different from the Solarium text. Are they being revised frequently?
Yeah, that's a good question. So that actually leads me to another topic, and that's to do with your data sources. So the distances are estimates, and they do get revised from time to time. For galaxies, a lot of times we're using redshifts because of the expansion of the universe to estimate how far they are. But you will notice that if you've been watching the data put up by Solarium here, that some of the brightnesses of some of these galaxies have seemed to be very faint, but they're wrong. So there are some, I can't know if I can find one here that's wrong. Like here, it says that M88 is magnitude 13.18. That's not true. Okay, M88 is actually, where are we here? Magnitude 10.4, much, much brighter than that. So you do need to check your sources, and don't be discouraged just because you see Stellarium and this is actually, this would actually, I think, be true on the Stellarium mobile app data set as well. So you do want to, if you want to use a Messier guide, obviously John and I have the Messier guide that we put together. We tried to put the correct values in. Another really good resource that I recommend is Stephen O'Meara's Deep Sky Companion books. Let's see if I can get this one to work. There we go. This is a thick book that you can use to get lots and lots of physics, astrophysics, and facts and figures about them.
I'm also always going to plug the Observer's Handbook, but we have the whole list of Messier objects at the very back. That's
right. And those have been vetted, and the data should be correct in the Observer's Handbook. So that's a great point.
And they're updated every year. Well, they usually don't change that much, but every edition we go through them. So
I just wanted to, before we move off to Leo, we'll grab a few more before we're done here. We do have a few more Messiers in the neighborhood that we'll do in a future session. So we've got 49 and 61 down below here. We've got some others up here in Coma that we'll cover on another time. Right. So let's go back to, and I'll go back to tonight, actually. Make sure I'm on tonight.
I'm also going to say, if anybody has any questions about what we just went over, pop them in the chat, pop them in the Q&A. As always, we're here to answer them. We'll fit them in when it makes sense to our conversation.
Yeah, and I'll also share some tips for viewing galaxies in general. Where did I put my tips here? So you want to if you don't see the object and you think you should be there, try tapping the telescope while you're looking, and the field will vibrate or shake a little bit, and that can draw your attention to faint objects. So that could be something that'll sort of trigger you into the fact that it's there. And then do use your averted vision, where you kind of look to one side and notice the rest of the field of view. That'll enhance the dimmer objects. We can talk a little bit more about that on a future session. All right, so let's finish up with a self-contained Messier minutes block to do with the galaxies that are in Leo, or the Messier objects in Leo, because truthfully, Leo is the more westerly constellation at this time of the year. So here's the meridian. So this is the north-south line, the green line. And anything to the right is west, and anything to the left is east. And you can see that Leo crosses the meridian when it's highest and most clearly visible first, before the Virgo cluster does. So really, if you're going to prioritize the objects that are kind of departing the scene first, you want to catch the more westerly ones, and that includes the objects in Leo. So I've got, I think, 6. Where am I list here? I'll go through. About 5 or 6 things in Leo, and you can see them marked down here. So the first up is we have, and this is the recommended order that I would recommend, is if you look for that friend, our friend, the star de Nebula, that's at the tail of the lion, and then you've got Regulus, which is at the sort of front chest of the lion. His head goes up and this way. And then you want to look for the star Cherton, which is a naked eye star between the two. And learn Cherton. It's really a friend of yours when you're finding galaxies, because if you take the line that joins Cherton to Regulus, find the halfway mark, and just drop 2 finger widths below. And again, if you want to use a Telrad, the rings, what you can do is you can find the midway point between Cherton and Regulus, put the top of your bullseye on the line, imaginary line, and your telescope will be centered pretty much right at Messier 95. So we have Messier 95, Messier 96, and Messier 105, all in the same field of view. So in your Marplossel that we talked about, you can actually fit both 95 and 96 together at, it's about 35 power that we're using here. And M96 is actually the brightest of the 3. It's an intermediate spiral galaxy, and it's barely visible with binoculars. It's medium bright. Most telescopes will show the core of it relatively well. So let's just zoom in here a little bit like this. So it's kind of that you'll see a kind of an amorphous blob, and then if you've got more aperture, you might pick up a few more details. M95 is a barred spiral galaxy. It's got a bit of an elongated center and a nice bright kind of ring-like halo of the arms around it. Might pick it up in binoculars, but it should be relatively easy to see in a backyard telescope, maybe even from the suburbs if if it's a very clear night. So look for that ring shape when you're looking at it. This one's only 32 million light years away. And then heading back to this one, M95, M96. If you slew around a little bit, you should be able to pick up M105. They don't quite all fit together in the field of view, but you can get sort of 2 at a time. So M105 is an elliptical galaxy, and I'll zoom in on this one again. There you go. And it's accompanied by another elliptical and a kind of an irregular spiral galaxy down here. So this one will require, it's a little bit sort of faint and fuzzy, so you will need a bigger telescope. I don't know if binoculars will do it. Maybe. And you want to look for the neighbors around it. So those are those 3, all sitting here sort of below the stomach of the lion. Now the next group that you can pick up, again, using the star Cherton. So Zosma to Cherton, you can actually cover that same span and heading down and look for the star called, in Stellarium, they call it Seedsang, but it's actually Iota Leonis. If you can find Iota Leonis, which is a magnitude 4 star, and point your telescope exactly halfway between Cherton and Iota, then you'll pick up the Leo triplet, the famous Leo triplet of galaxies. So Leo triplet starts here with M66, and these will fit all 3 together in your field of view with a 26 millimeter Plossel eyepiece. So that's a really fun thing to stumble on those 3 at once. So 66 is the largest and brightest. It's an intermediate spiral galaxy, 36 million light years away. You want to look for maybe some structure in the arms. And again, let's crank up the magnification to say colossal. So you can see it's not symmetrical. So you want to take a look for that while you're observing it. M65 is smaller, more compact. So it could be a bit easier in binoculars because the light is all concentrated into a smaller area. And you want to look for, if you have a bigger telescope, you want to look for arcs of dust in it. So let me just zoom in even closer so you can see the dark arcs of dust that you might pick up hints of in a bigger telescope. And finally, we have this other unnamed gentleman here or lady. This is the so-called Hamburger Galaxy. The Hamburger Galaxy is, let's see, NGC 3628. Don't know why Messier didn't include him. You think Charles Messier would have added this one? It does tend to be maybe a little bit fainter than the other ones, but it's a great one to keep an eye out for. So again, it doesn't.
Too hungry, and then
doesn't
went and
count.
got a snack before you wrote it down.
Yeah, it doesn't count towards your Messier certificate, but you definitely want to make note or take a look at it when you're there. So the idea here is you've got the hamburger patty is the dark dust in the center, and then you've got sort of a squarish envelope representing the bun. So that's your Hamburger Galaxy. Okay, I'll stop talking and take some questions.
Throw any questions in the chat or the Q&A, and we'll keep an eye out for them. I don't see any questions currently in the YouTube chat.
All right.
So all the resources we've talked about are put in links here, will be in the description box of the YouTube video on our RASC Canada YouTube page. And you can always find it on our Insider's Guide to Galaxy website. Sorry, Chris.
Oh, and I'm just going to toss out a couple more thoughts about seeing galaxies. Filters don't help with galaxies because galaxies are made of starlight, and filters tend to block starlight in favor of nebulas. So you don't want to use filters for visual, that is. What you want to do, let's see what else I have here.
Sorry.
I was going to say that if you want to use a paper atlas to find your Messiers, let's see if I can get my paper atlas to work here. No. There you go. If you have a Newtonian reflector telescope, all you have to do to match your eyepiece is to turn it upside down, and the star chart will match your eyepiece. What were you going to say?
We have another question about, will the Messier list ever be updated? Or is it just kind of set the way it is now?
It's set. Yeah, it's set. But of course, we have alternates because there are thousands of deep sky objects. The Messier list does not represent the best. It just represents what Messier and his counterparts felt needed to be tabulated to help them in their search for comets. So there are lots of bright objects that were never put in the Messier list that you can discover. That's the whole purpose of my my Beyond Messier theme in Sky News, is to expose people to other just as good targets that are worthy of some review. In fact, one of the ones that I've shared before, I'll just share it again quickly here before we finish up. In Leo, so if you've got your triplet and your other Messiers in Leo, but if you find the head of the lion, look for a reddish star on front of the nose of the lion, and then aim your telescope a little below it. And there's a galaxy here that I just don't understand why it didn't get put in Messier's list. It's called NGC 2903, and it's a fantastic galaxy. I've viewed it. It's really, really neat. So yeah, so we have that. So things like this are part of other lists that people come up with. So RASC has the finest NGC list that Alan Dyer put together. David Levy has a list in the Observer's Handbook of some of his favorite objects. And then we have the Caldwell objects that I've written about before as well.
So check out Sky News articles. Chris is publishing a new one every, so far this season. You've had a new one since the beginning of the year?
Yep.
also, we have another question about where our background pictures are from. This one I edited myself based on free Sky News astrophotography data taken with a robotic telescope. Chris, what's behind me? Why can't I think about it? It's not M20, is it?
Trifid Nebula, I think.
Trifid Nebula.
Is it the Trifid Nebula? I think so.
Yeah, Trifid. Yeah. And Chris, where'd you get your photo from?
So I believe mine is NGC 6744 in Pavo, visible in the Southern Hemisphere. And I picked it because it may be what our Milky Way would look like from a distance. It's got the same characteristics, same structure. Milky Way has a slightly elongated bar and then spiral arms with lots of star-forming regions. So that's what that is. And it probably came from Wikipedia.
So yeah, we get our images from a variety of places. However, if you're interested in creating your own free Sky News data from the telescope, our telescope, or you could purchase it yourself. Linda, thank you for sharing your favorite view of the Leo triplets. Was Leo's belly included Mars? It was really distracting to have Mars in it, but also really cool, she says. I think to answer most of the questions in terms, Angad asked if Messiers have rings. Well, Messiers are deep sky objects, so even if they did have rings, we wouldn't really be able to see them. So because they're mostly stars and galaxies and made up of that type of stuff.
Stephen Dow's asking about line thickness of markings. I'm not sure what he means.
Talking about how you get your thicker lines in your stellarium. So I sent him the Solarium Sites guide, but is it just automatic on your Solarium to set up those thick bold lines, or do you change them yourself?
No, I've customized it to make it a little easier for people to see it. So if you're in the F4 menu and go to markings, then you can plot things like the ecliptic and the meridian and things like that, and you can change the thickness of the lines here. And then if you go to the Star Lore tab, this is where it controls the constellation lines, and you can increase the thickness of the constellation lines, and you can increase the thickness of the boundaries and things like that. And you can also change the font size of the labels in here as well. So that's what I do.
And if you're interested in learning, I'm going to plug more about Solarium, and you're a RASC member. We have free Solarium classes starting from I've never used Solarium before to advanced users. And that is used to be hosted by Toronto Centre. Now it's hosted by RASC National. I think you met Blake on a previous episode of Insider's Guide. He is the one that runs that. So just Google Royal RASC Solarium training or software training, and you can sign up for the next one for that if you're interested in learning more and become an expert like Chris on Solarium.
So we have our next session, our topics TBD at the moment, but will be kind of near a full moon week. And then the one after that will be a new moon week again. So there'll be another opportunity to get the fainter objects. We have about 13 spring Messiers left to describe in our program here. So we'll get to them over the next couple of sessions. And then we'll be getting ready to hit fall, hit summertime.
That's great. It looks like we're almost halfway through. We're getting close to halfway through our Messier list.
Yeah. Well, once you're done spring, you're well through it. So, and we cheated a little bit because we actually threw in some autumn targets and when we started.
So hopefully everyone can get some Messier viewing in soon, or just viewing in general now that the skies are clearing up and it's no longer cloudy winter days. And let us know next week not next week, 2 weeks from now, if you're able to see anything and if you attempted to view the Virgo cluster. That's my challenge again to all of you. Try to do the Virgo Messier objects we showed you today. And thank you, everyone.
One thing that I did when I logged the Messiers for my certificate is I separated the finding from the describing. So I successfully found them manually with my telescope without GoTo. I logged when and where I did it. And I left a gap in my logbook. And then later on, I went back and I fleshed it out with more details about them. But when I had more time.
One more thing before you go, if you're interested in, fingers crossed, we actually do the Messier Marathon, it will be on our YouTube channel. So if you know where to find Insider's Guide, RASC, RASC Canada, so RAS Canada, and that is our
RASC
YouTube
Canada.
channel.
Right.
Yeah. Thank you all for joining us, and thank you for all your thanks. We really appreciate that you enjoy what we produce every 2 weeks. So mostly Chris. Everybody needs to give a huge shout out for Chris. He does so much hard work for this. So
No problem.